Do you believe in God?
Hmm?
Do you believe in God?
Or too late.
ನೀರಿನ ಮೇಲೆ ಚಿತ್ರ ಕೆತ್ತಲಿಕ್ಕಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ.
Welcome to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. This podcast is brought to you by the Bangalore International Centre. My name is Arshia, and I'm here with Anmol. We recorded these conversations with Girish right before his death in June 2019. In these episodes, we have a chance to listen to Girish's wide-ranging observations about his life and his work. Along with excerpts from his plays, we'll hear various people talk about his legacy as an artist and as a public intellectual.
ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನದಿಗೆ ನೆನಪಿನ ಹಂಗಿಲ್ಲ.
Many of Girish's plays confront what it means to deal with the divine. Does God exist? What is the source of morality? But this shouldn't come as a surprise because he really was a fervent existentialist.
Even as a young man, as he's writing Tughlaq, Girish is asking questions about what it means to live in a world with God or in a world without God.
I was at Oxford. I went to India, what used to be called, I think, India House. I took out an elementary book of history, started with Mohenjo-daro, and started it. Where is a good subject for Mohenjo-daro? Came to Mohenjo-daro, Ashoka was a cliche, Shahjahan, all this sort of, went through it. Until I came to Tughlaq. I was reading it. And I said, mad Tughlaq. God, marvelous, because of existentialism and so on, madness was in the air. So, and I was about 23, 24, mad. So I wrote this play about the mad Sultan. Even what made it even madder was that he had actually banned public prayer in his kingdom for 5 years. And I thought, how marvelous, And I wrote about him. But then as I started reading deeper and deeper, it occurred to me that if you were an atheist, as I wanted him to be, you wouldn't ban public prayer. It would mean nothing to you. It's only a man who was a theist, who loved God, who would worry so much about prayer, to whom prayer would matter. He somewhere wanted to challenge God. Do what you like. I won't pray for you. And why? So, in fact, that whole complex attitude.
That's fascinating. You might think that someone who bans public prayer is an atheist, but Girish makes Tughlaq somebody who's in a quarrel with God, and as someone who I think Tughlaq is actually a believer.
I'm not convinced about that. Sure, Tughlaq is challenging God, but I see his actions as coming from someone who is not sure, someone who is testing God.
All right, let's listen to an excerpt from Girish's Tughlaq, where the emperor has just ordered his stepmother to be stoned to death. Tughlaq was first published in English in 1972. Pritham Koil Pillai, Mallika Prasad, and Vivek Madan read this scene.
Tell the Nayab Wazir I want her stoned to death publicly tomorrow morning.
Not that, Muhammad.
That is how an adulteress dies.
Don't do that to me.
Take her away!
Please.
God. God in heaven. Please help me. Please don't let go of my hand. My skin drips with blood, and I don't know how much of it is mine and how much of others. I started in your path, Lord. Why am I wandering naked in this desert now? I started in search of you. Why have I become a pig rolling in this gory mud? Raise me, clean me, cover me with your infinite mercy. I can only clutch at the helm of your cloak with my bloody fingers and plead. I can only beg. Have pity on me. I have no one but you now. Only you. Only you. You.
Your Majesty.
Come in, Bharani. You've come at the right moment. You have saved me from treason, you know. I was trying to pray. Think of that. No one in my kingdom is allowed to pray, and I was praying against my own orders. But what else could I do, Bharani? My legs couldn't hold me up any longer.
Girish's plays are about big philosophical questions. But instead of presenting them as abstractions, he writes these questions into the dilemmas of his characters. In Tale Danda, for example, he takes on the inevitable conflict between spiritual authority and temporal power, between Basava, the saint, and Bijala, the king, right? So whose law is supreme? Is it the law of God or is it the law of the land? And these questions, these themes, these issues, they're timeless. Yeah, we respond to them fully in 2021, even though some of these plays were written 50 and 60 years ago. And that's really something.
Yeah, and he's always looking at others and their works to see how they dealt with these same fundamental questions. Girish wasn't just engaging with the problems of existentialism, that of God, that of morality, in his own writing. I think existentialism, in fact, became a lens through which he looked at the works of other theatre makers. And you can see this in the excitement and openness with which he received Peter Brook's Mahabharata in the late 1980s.
I found it very moving because some of the performances were really super. The Karna in it and the Kunti in it. In fact, the black characters came across extremely. Some of it was a bit nonsensical, but then that's inevitable in theatre. One thing that it did was it made it an international name. Peter Brook made Mahabharata a sexy word, like the Trojan women, or things like that. Oedipus, put it on that level at international discourse. That had to be accepted.
I was a grungy graduate student in Chicago when Girish and a bunch of my teachers went off to see Peter Brooks's Mahabharata in New York. And I remember arguing with him, like, how can you see this play? This is all cultural appropriation. Peter Brook came to India, he watched a bunch of Indian stuff, and then he just picked what he wanted and strung it all together. But we were not the only ones. Even in India, there was a lot of hostility to Peter Brooks's project, including from critics like Sadanand Menon and Rustam Bharucha. I remember Bharucha actually wrote that Peter Brooks had placed Mahabharata in an Orientalist framework and presented it to an international market. But even at that time, Girish was absolutely sure that Peter Brook had the right to interpret the Mahabharata in any way that he wanted. Girish believed that the Mahabharata was big enough for everybody. So, why not for Peter Brook?
But then again, I didn't expect him to convey to me what I got from Mahabharata direct. Because he was doing it for a different audience, with different people. He was being criticized at that time. And people were saying that he treated it as a kind of metaphor for Vietnam. I think also whatever was there, whichever war was there. And that's why he was heavily criticized in the New York Times or one of the. But I said that to Wendy. And Wendy said, God, I must take that down at that time. I said, Wendy, but that's it. Mahabharata is always our latest war. So is Andhayug, which is 1947. And I know that at the end of the performance of which I saw in here, people were very disturbed. He said, but your God show no morality. Krishna just betrays, Dharma Raja betrays. They don't seem to be able to, hold on. So I said, yes, that's the whole point of Mahabharata, is the difficulty of being good, carrying on moral life. Christianity is easy because it's all written in the book. It's there. In Islam, it's all there in the Quran. But it's not so easy in Hinduism to be good, so that ultimately Dharmaraja also lies.
I love that line, that the Mahabharata is always our latest war. Others criticized Brooke for seeing the Mahabharata as a metaphor. Girish saw that was precisely the power of the Mahabharata, that it can be read as a story of our times, of any times. That was also one of the reasons that Girish liked Dharamveer Bharati's Andhayug. Bharati had written his version of the end of the Mahabharata in the aftermath of partition and the Second World War.
Girish could be so generous with other people's interpretations because he really knew his Mahabharata. And it's not that he only knew the Hindu epics. He was also very interested in Hindu dharma, particularly how dharma dealt with questions of morality.
So the whole idea of Hindu dharma is really close to nonsensical. It varies so much from interpretation to interpretation. Even in Orthodox Hindu religion, ultimately, what is your moral action? How do you justify it? But in Hinduism, it's justified by your dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Time of your life, you're there. Each one has a different right to decide. So each time, the Hindu can redefine his moral purpose, unlike Middle Eastern religions. Is there such a thing as Brahmanya? Now, this whole posing of the question is Christian, I think. I don't think it really makes sense. Because Brahmana is, you're given Brahmana, you're born Brahmin. What more do you want? You're told what to do. If you're not a sacred friend, you're not a Brahmin. If you eat eggs, you're not a Brahmin. It's clearly laid out at each stage.
This is intriguing, that he examines Hindu dharma, that's Hindu practice, through looking at Brahmanya, or what can be called Brahminhood, or, being a Brahmin. So the starting point of the inquiry is the self. It's himself rather than the other. And, it's obviously important for Girish to acknowledge his caste position and grapple with that before doing anything else. But what do you think he means when he says that the question of Brahmanya itself is illegitimate?
I think what Girish is actually telling us is that to pose a question like this is to assume there's an answer, and that doesn't hold. You're a Christian when you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but there is no set of beliefs or credo that you can hold on to become a Brahmin. You have to be born into Brahmanya and then live by its rules.
Can be thrown out of Brahmanya, but you can't have a choice. This is how you can't have a Martin Luther who redefines Christianity, saying that this is what they mean to me. And, it's what the Bible means to me. Because the caste system is so strong. You want to stay outside the caste system? Go. We don't care. But if you want to stay as a part of the caste, as part of the family, then you have to accept all these rituals, the shaving, all this.
I miss that. I miss the clarity with which he speaks about caste, especially as a man with such an extremely privileged caste background.
I admire that he's able to see how caste undergirds most of what we call Hindu society. But that's why I don't think he's right when he says you can ignore caste and the society will let you be.
Oh, I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying if you're willing to jettison the entirety of caste society, if you're willing to become a sannyasi or a fakir, you can do that. But anything short of that, and caste society will extract its price.
It's like the film you saw, Ghatashraddha. Very touching, people loving it, thinking it's marvelous and so on. And it ends with the widow being shaven because she has become pregnant. But the point is, you don't shave a widow as a punishment at all. Shaving a widow is accepting her in the society. In South Indian society, a woman is shaved so that she can enter your kitchen, do your puja, help with the household duties. In fact, women with hair were not allowed to participate in the food all day. And that is one way. So in fact, you punish the woman for being part of the society. You accept this punishment and then you can do this. But Kasaragod turns it around, to make a very touching ending.
Girish observed Hindu practices carefully. He saw how purity and pollution are integral to the maintenance of the caste system, but also that the caste system maintains the social order. But he was bothered by this, how the caste system denied an individual the moral freedom that other aspects of Hindu dharma seem to offer, no?
Girish sees that on the one hand, with its lack of absolute moral code that's handed to you, Hindu dharma opens the possibility of real existential choice. You have to ask yourself, what is the source of my moral action? But on the other hand, the strong caste injunctions, they take that freedom away and place enormous constraints on moral choice. Because, after all, one has to act in accordance with the rules of the caste that one is born into.
We asked Girish when he had become so aware of caste practices.
Actually, I woke up to it only after some time. The book woke me up. Then I really worked very hard. I read anything I can go to. As I said, there was Shah, there was Ramanujan, there were G.B. Joshi, and many of my friends were very orthodox friends. And I worked with them about Hinduism. But at home, there was no such thing as Hinduism. My mother, as I told you, was a child widow. And the whole thought of shaving someone's head would have been horrified. And my father just rejected ritualism.
So often Girish said that when he first read Samskara, his reaction was, God, I wish I had written that. So let's listen to a pivotal event in Samskara, this book so beloved to Girish. This is Ananthamurthy's Samskara, published in Kannada in 1965. It's read by Vivek Madan.
The Acharya suddenly remembered it was time for his wife's medicine. His legs had gone numb with all that sitting. He walked out weakly with slow steps. As he walked a little, he heard footsteps behind him in the forest dark, and he stopped. Sound of bangles. He listened. "Who's that?" he asked, and waited. "Me," said Chandri, in an embarrassed, low voice. Pranesh Acharya felt strange, standing like that all on a sudden with a woman in the dark of the forest. He searched for words, remembering his own helplessness, overcome with sadness, he stood there murmuring, "Maruti, Maruti." Listening to his gentle, grief-stricken voice, Chandri suddenly overflowed with compassion. The poor man, famished, distressed, he had suffered and grown so lean in a single day for me. The poor Brahmin. She wanted to hold his feet and offer him her devotion. The next second she was falling at his feet. It was pitch dark, nothing was visible. As she bent over as if overcome with grief, she didn't quite fall at his feet. Her breast touched his knee. In the vehemence of her stumbling, the buttons on her blouse caught and tore open. She leaned her head on his thigh and embraced his legs. Overwhelmed with tender feeling, filled with pity at this Brahmin who had perhaps never known the pleasure of woman, helpless at her thought that there was no one but him for her in the Agrahara. Overcome, she wept. Praneshacharya, full of compassion, bewildered by the tight hold of a young female not his own, bent forward to bless her with his hands. His bending hand felt her hot breath, her warm tears. His hair rose in a thrill of tenderness, and he caressed her loosened hair. The Sanskrit formula of blessing got stuck in his throat. As his hand played on her hair, Chandri's intensity doubled. She held his hands tightly and stood up, and she pressed them to her breasts, now beating away like a pair of doves. Touching full breasts he had never touched, Praneshacharya felt faint. As in a dream he pressed them. As the strength in his legs was ebbing, Chandri sat the Acharya down, holding him close. The Acharya's hunger, so far unconscious, suddenly raged, and he cried out like a child in distress, "Amma!" Chandri leaned him against her breasts, took the plantains out of her lap, peeled them and fed them to him. Then she took off her sari, spread it on the ground, and lay on it, hugging Praneshacharya close to her, weeping, flowing in helpless tears.
When the book appeared, an article appeared in a Hubli magazine where a Pandit wrote and said, "This is a whole problem built on sandhills. This is no problem at all, because we have shlokas where you say, if I come across a dead body, if I don't know him, I shall treat him as my cousin. May whatever sins he may have committed be forgiven. I have done my duty, which is to..." So, he sort of says, I don't want to be responsible for the sins of the dead man, but my duty is to see that the dead body doesn't rot. So it's almost close to Islamic, if someone takes a dead body, you go and touch your shoulder to this. You probably know that samskara is based on a true story. It happened in Anantmurti's life. What happened was, Anantmurti's village, which he describes there, the uncle died. The Dalit woman continued to stay in the Agrahara, and they didn't want to throw her out. She continued until one day she died. Then the question arose, who will pick up the body? Now, this is entirely different. But the truth is, would you touch an untouchable's dead body?
It's striking that both Ananthamurti and Girish, as Brahmins in the 1960s, take on issues of caste. They saw that to think and write about India, to be truly modern, you had to take on the deep-set hierarchies and inequalities that are part and parcel of Indian society. After all, one of the impulses of modernity, almost everywhere in the world, is to critique religion. And in that sense, there was no way for Ananthamurti and Girish to be modern without engaging with the issues of caste.
Although he is supposed to be the most erudite of Shastris, Praneshacharya cannot find a human solution. And has to ultimately surrender to a flower. That's how Naipaul saw the book, as an example of, in his a glorious criticism of the book. He saw it as an example of decadent Hinduism.
Girish gets excited about samskara because the character of Pranesh Acharya faces an existential crisis, right? And Pranesh Acharya, the crisis is so deep that he looks to a flower, to provide a way out of the crisis, to provide meaning.
Yeah, how hard is it for us to be responsible, to deal with making choices and owning the consequences of those choices? Because choice is at the crux of any existentialist framework. We have to decide how we lead our lives. You see this problem of individual responsibility in Girish's play Flowers too. The main character is a priest who is trapped in his Brahmanya. He ends up going to God for solving a problem of his making.
Yeah, but this is not a generic existentialism. It's an existentialism rooted in Brahminical culture. These men, the priest in Samskara and the priest in Flowers, they're struggling with their bodies. They're struggling with desire, right? Because the object of their desire and the fulfillment of that desire is fundamentally transgressive to their caste position.
Here is an excerpt from the opening of Flowers, first published in English in 2005. The monologue is read by Preetham Koyal Pillai.
Every day at sunset, the cannon goes off on the ramparts, announcing that the chieftain has set off from home for the temple. That gives me a full hour to get ready for the puja. My wife attends to the basic ritual requirements, such as joss sticks and camphor, and the placement of wicks in different silver plates for the aarti. I have a dip in the tank, and in the wet dhoti, sit down in the sanctum surrounded by baskets of flowers. Everything else then recedes into hazy, scarcely felt distance, and for an hour, there is only the linga and me, and a conversation conducted through flowers. Malige, sevanti, chennuhu, sampige, kanakambara. By the time the chieftain arrives with his entourage, I am ready. He has a keen eye for beauty, the young chieftain. If I have managed to lay out the flowers in a particularly innovative pattern, he nods his head in appreciation, turns to his retinue, which, needless to add, obediently spouts various standard phrases in agreement. The puja over, he accepts a single flower as God's prasada, presses it to his eyes, sticks it behind his right ear, and rides home. He's not given to saying much. They leave. I hear the clatter of hooves fading up the rocky road. Then I carefully pick the flowers from the linga, tie them in a bundle in my thin muslin shoulder cloth, and make my way to Chandravati's house. Chandravati is a courtesan, the only breach in the invisible defenses I have built around my private domain.
Well, it's actually not my story. It's a folk tale from Chitradurga fort. And the story occurs in a Kannada novel by Tarasu, you see. And the main thing is the flowers and the prostitute and so on don't matter. They just argue with each other. What is more important, music or political power? And so completely, when I first read it, I said, what a beautiful story, how completely ruined. It seems to have missed the whole point, the erotic point of flowers being there at all. But then that was typical of the Kannada writers. I mean, The courtesan in the story occurs in 5 lines, I think. That's it.
In Girish's Flowers, he picks the courtesan from the folktale and he fleshes her out. She becomes the catalyst that really pushes the priest towards his moment of crisis.
But before we get into all of that, do you think Flowers is actually a play? Why not a short story?
It's funny you should say that, because when Royston Abel directed the premiere of Flowers for the Rangashankara Festival here in Bangalore, he was really struggling to give it form, to be able to put it on stage. And he said, man, this guy has given me nothing, I'm going to give him nothing back. And it turned out to be a most interesting presentation.
It was certainly very curious and certain intensity to it. And I enjoyed the fact that it reduced it all to the words. It has been done in all kinds of nonsensical ways. In Kannada, dancers come, they do this and that and that. But what he has done, Royston is just presented with ambiance, which intensifies the presentation. The point of the story is, it all happens in his mind.
I find it interesting, Girish's insistence that the point of the story is that it happens in the priest's head. The interior monologue, actually, it's the perfect form to explore an existential crisis. The priest has to figure it out for himself, but all by himself, not with the help of others. So why don't you bring us up to speed with the play? What is the crisis?
So there's a showdown between the priest and the local chieftain. The priest who so loves the linga ends up adorning his mistress, the courtesan, with the flowers meant for worship. And when the chieftain calls him out on that, the priest prays to his god. And sure enough, there is a miracle.
I mean, when I gave the story to Paula Richmond, she said, oh, but Shaiva literature, there's a lot of this kind of story. The whole point is bhakti prevails. The king is right there. The king was right to, reprimand the priest and saying that you've done it. But the priest asserts that his bhakti is what matters. He did it in pure bhakti. And although he lies, and he has done all the... this happens as again and again in Indian literature. The bhakti prevails over law and order. The bhakta is made triumphant and the king is defeated, and law and order is not considered as important as your trust in God.
So conventional wisdom makes us see the terror of living in a world without God. If there is no God, how are we supposed to know what's the right thing to do? But Girish turns that problem on its head.
Yeah, he makes us confront the terror of a world where there is God, where God acts, and where God acts to save you even though you're not worthy of redemption. Why do you need to live by any rules or norms if God can make your transgressions go away whenever he decides? And that's the bhakti problem, as Girish sees it. So let's see how Girish works out this problem in Flowers. Pritham Koil Pillai is the priest.
On top of the hills, I can see the torches of soldiers stationed to guard the approaches to the temple. I am the state saint now, to be prized, protected, and shown off to visiting envoys. And I have a quarrel to pick with God. Why has God done this to me? I had only asked him to give me the courage to live in disgrace, for I knew I had tainted myself. The chieftain was right to question me, to humiliate me publicly if he so decided. I'm guilty of gross dereliction, of sacrilege, guilty of cruelty to the 2 women I loved. Why then should God cast his vote on my behalf? Because I loved him? Has God the right to mock justice in favor of love for him? Or does he have a different logic? If he does, it's not fair that he should expect me to abide by it, not demanding to know what that logic is. Such grace is condescension, even if it comes from God. Why am I worthy of this burden he has placed on my shoulders? I refuse to bear it. God must understand I simply cannot live on his terms. Scorpio has crawled out of the recess in the third step underwater. His reflection is floating towards me. The hollow is empty. As a boy, I used to shove my head into the hollow to test how long I could hold my breath. I shall do so again now, but not to test my lungs. I shall seek in the narrow confines of that hollow the answers that God has denied me.
That is the point. Which morality prevails? If you want to live in a world which has morality, which morality prevails? Is it our morality? Is it the king's morality? Or is it God's morality? And if God's morality is such that anyone can be upheld as right, then it's not morality at all. Because, human beings can't live. I don't know how to live. If tomorrow some Bhakta Tukaram can fly off on a Garud, then what can I do? The blankness that's left behind, if you really believe that kind of. He wants to know, why does all that hurt that he caused to his own wife, to his own courtesan? She's last described as like a dog on four legs, like a dog with her breasts hanging and looking completely bewildered as to where she was now. Completely humiliating situation now. His wife he lets down, his courtesan he lets down, the king he lets down, and yet the God lets down. So that it intrigued me. It's also what happens in Taladanda. He says, I didn't take the money, but the people want him to have taken the money and the gods to have saved him. They say, oh, no, the treasury you had emptied and the God came and filled it all up and saved you. You were the bhakta. And he says, but I didn't take the money. But the people want a miracle. So
Girish takes this critical moment in Kannada history and infuses it with his particular ethical concerns. In Taladanda, it's the 12th century, Basavanna has been appointed the state treasurer and he's doing the right thing. He's running the state treasury in an honest manner. But people aren't interested in that. His followers want a miracle. They want to see him as a saint, even if it means condemning him as a thief who is saved by God.
So we've been going on and on about how Girish is an existentialist, but he's not an uncritical existentialist. In Taladanda, Basavanna refuses to command the Sharanas to protest with him. Yeah, because Girish's Basavanna is so invested in individual choice and responsibility that everyone has to make the decision for themselves. But this freedom of choice leads to chaos and failure. It's the end of the movement, of everything that Basavanna has worked for.
Here, Girish is making us ask a new question. He has found a problem at the heart of existentialism. What happens to collective action in a world where every individual decides for themselves?
But for Girish, these are not abstract problems. Even as a young man, he felt the tension of finding his answers either in the intellectual rigor of the Shastras or in the kind of emotional surrender that bhakti demands.
I was lucky in that sense. As I said, in the influence that I had of these two completely opposite people. K.J. Shah, who was all for academic theory, who believed that bhakti is nonsense, fuck bhakti, he said one day. And he said, the best of Indian thinking was all in the Shastras, right from the Veda, Upanishad, Gauda, and Manusmriti, including what Manu has to say about Asprishas, all that, and all the singing and coming out spontaneously, he thought was nonsensical. In effect, he was also rejecting the feminist world. Ramanujan, as you know, went progressively into the women's world, more and more, and I saw him go into it. So these two worlds, I was right in the middle of these two thinkers, powerful thinkers. I think at the end, Ramanujan admired what Shah was doing, but Shah didn't like Ramanujan.
Between these two influential teachers, Girish obviously had greater affinity for Ramanujan's way of thinking. Look at Nagamandala, two folk tales that Ramanujan shared with Girish. And even a decade later, Dreams of Tipu Sultan. It was Ramanujan again who told Girish that Tipu had kept a record of his dreams.
Yeah, but I want to come back to Girish, the existentialist. A good teacher can only take you that far, but a true existentialist must find their own answers. So finally, we cut to the chase and we asked Girish what he believed. Did he believe in God? Do you believe in God?
What? Too late. Codified religion has always put me off. But I'm sympathetic to people who are religious.
I understand that. I mean, I have the same reaction. I perfectly understand that religion truly enriches people's lives, but I'm not one of those people. It doesn't work for me.
But you have to believe in something.
Yeah. Girish believed in something.
No, we were not brought up in this at all. Ours is much more of a humanist view, which is to say you bring up your children, you bring yourself to decide what is right and what is wrong. And this applies not because you're a Hindu, not because you're a Muslim or whatever, but you apply it to the whole society. This is how I would like a human being to be treated. And these are the terms which I would like any human being, whether the Christian, widow.
You have been listening to The River Has No Fear of Memories, a series of conversations with Girish Karnad. We thank the Nilekani Philanthropies for supporting this series, Pallavi MD and Konarak Reddy for the original music, Gokul Abhishek, Gaurav Krishna, and the Bangalore studio for sound recording and engineering. At the Bangalore International Centre, our thanks to Lekha Naidu, Raghu Tenkaila, Saraswati MP, S. Sarvanna Raj, Rajashekhar B.N., Manas Sampath, and of course, V. Ravichandran. Ajay Krishnan, Sunil Shanbag, Vinod Ravindran, and Vivek Madan, thank you for being there when we needed you. Thank you also, Vivek Shanbag and Shanta Gokhale. Our special thanks to the Karnad family. Anmol Tikku and myself, Arshia Sattar, have put these episodes together from conversations that we had with Girish Karnad in June 2019.